After surviving the War of Wrath, the elves believed the shadows had departed, and all the civilized races of Middle-earth could once more live in peace. The golden days of the Eldar were over, and it was apparent that the race of men was becoming increasingly formidable, and poised to supersede the elves as the leading race on Middle-earth. However, Elven civilization was not ready to fade away just yet, and throughout the Second Age, the fair folk would continue to create powerful kingdoms, and with them armies of grandeur. With the dawning of a new era, the elves would soon learn that they could no longer face the shadow alone, and would have to sacrifice their place in Middle-earth if they hoped to save it. Welcome to our latest video on the world of Middle-earth, featuring the elven armies of the Second Age. One other place you can't go it alone is the high seas clashes of our sponsor today, World of Warships Legends. This is a multiplayer naval combat game in which you'll fleet up with teams of various sizes to engage in strategic naval battles in which the wisdom and grace of the elves will serve you superbly. Join over 8 million players in collecting and upgrading various classes of ship, from destroyers to aircraft carriers. Each has a different role to play in achieving victory, so while it only takes a few battles to become a skilled commander, there's scope to master these vessels and reap the rewards. With 400 ships and 100 commanders to choose from, you'll have plenty of weapons to develop your style. While it's based on the modern age, right now you can gain allies from the future. A new Star Trek event is ongoing, in which commanders like Jean-Luc Picard have been tasked with leading the ships of our world to test their skill, and hence you can employ them in your battles. In fact, you can get Picard for free by completing a special mission. There's even a unique Star Trek port to unlock by logging in right now. If you're new to the game, we can also offer a starter bonus set, including the premium battleship Arkansas and cruiser Karlsruhe, along with a load of powerful resources. Check it all out and grab the free stuff by signing up via our link in the description. After the War of Wrath, much of Beleriand had sunk into the waves. However, Osiriand remained above the sea, and henceforth came to be known as the Land of Lindon, with the seas that now divided Lindon from Forlindon in the north and Harlindon in the south becoming known as the Gulf of Lune. Elven refugees from Beleriand flocked to Lindon. In the first year of the Second Era, these refugees built the Grey Havens, for those who wished to sail for Valinor or Erisea. Círdan the Shipwright took the role of Lord of the Havens, while Gil-galad took the role of High King of the Elves of the West, with Lindon as his seat of power. Yet all was not harmonious in this new realm, for tensions existed between the Teleri survivors of Doriath and the Assyrian and Fëanorian Noldors. This prompted migrations, with some belligerent factions moving away to found new realms, such as Eregion and later Imladris. Other survivors migrated east, finding distant relatives in the Woodland Realm and Lothlorien to settle among. The realm of Lindon was populated primarily by the Noldor and the Teleri. The Teleri mostly resided in Forlindon, which was ruled by Celeborn and Galadriel, while the majority of the Noldor resided in Harlindon, which was ruled by Gil-galad. The majority of the Teleri were Sindar, though the Nandor, Falathrim and Lequendi would have also been present in smaller numbers. In SA 600, the Númenórean ship Entulesi arrived in Mithlond. Gil-galad welcomed these humans, establishing official relations with them and aiding them in re-establishing contact with their kin, the Middlemen. Unbeknownst to the elves, Sauron had survived the War of Wrath, travelling east and south as he consolidated his former master's forces. Still, it would take centuries for Sauron's plans to manifest. After 200 years of peace, in SA 882, the Númenórean forces in Ethir Anduin and Lebanon reported a new shadow rising in the east. The leader of this Númenórean garrison, Eldarion, believed these shadows to be sourced from the tyranny of evil men, but Gil-galad believed it to be the work of a former servant of Morgoth. Gil-galad gave Eldarion a letter for his father, Tar-Meneldur, warning him of the evil rising in the east and asking for his help. He advised that together they should form a defensive line at Hithyglir, which the enemy was already creeping towards. Lindon's strength lay in her military alliances, geographical location, and superior craft of arms. Throughout the Second Age, the Elven Kingdom joined two major alliances. The first was with Númenor, Eregion, Lothlorien and Khazad-dûm, and the second was with Arnor, Gondor, Rivendell, the Woodland Realm, Lothlorien and Khazad-dûm. Lindon's geographical location made it a bulwark against Sauron's aggression, for Sauron feared Númenor daring never to voyage upon the sea nor go near the coasts. Lindon would also establish the buffer state of Eregion. Lindon enjoyed the best skillcraft of the age from a variety of elves who specialised in various fields. Círdan and the survivors among the Falathrim were the best shipbuilders in Middle-earth, providing Lindon with an excellent navy. Meanwhile, the Noldor produced the best weapons and armour of the Second Age, in part due to aid provided by the Númenóreans and Dwarves of Khazad-dûm. Being populated from surviving veterans of Gondolin, Nargothrond, Hithlum, Doriath, and other elven realms, the population of Lindon boasted a diversity of skills in weaponry and battle formations. In combat, the Noldor typically favoured the sword and shield, with some Gondolindrim veterans perhaps specialising in maces, iron-studded clubs, and slings. The Sindar were proficient with bows, and Nandor were adept with axes. Elves of all extractions were proficient in the use of spears. Even King Gil-galad himself famously wielded the iconic glaive Aeglos in battle. As the elves used all sorts of armaments, Lindon's smiths forged all manner of weapons and armour. These included swords, axes, spears, bows, coats of mail armour, burnies, hauberks, greaves, vambraces, helms, and shields. Alongside the Númenóreans, the elves of Lindon were among the most heavily armoured soldiers in all of Middle-earth. Elven veterans most likely trained in the battle formations of the First Age, such as the Gondolindrim Phalanx, Fëanorian Heavy Cavalry Charge, Doriathrin March Warden Patrols, and Hithlum Horseback Archery. During this time, the Númenóreans adopted the Thangale Phalanx and Dunnaith Wedge formation. Thus, it's reasonable to assume that the Lindon Elves practiced similar battle formations. For a time, Lindon also held two rings of power, Naya and Vilya. These rings had the power to hold back the passage of time, postponing the weariness of the world. Naya could rekindle hearts with its fire to inspire others to resist tyranny, while Vilya could heal and preserve wisdom. These wings also warned each ring bearer of Sauron's treachery, allowing them foreknowledge of his coming attacks. Yet above all, Lindon's greatest strength lay in her alliances. Throughout the Second Age, Celeborn and Galadriel travelled throughout the land, establishing friendly relations among the many different elven groups. In SA 500, Galadriel felt a spreading residue of evil, and believed that it could only be defeated by an alliance of civilized peoples, working together as one. In SA 700, Celeborn, Galadriel and Celebrimbor ventured east, founding the realm of Eregion, and establishing its capital, Ostinethil, in SA 750. After settling in their new lands, Galadriel and Celebrimbor formed a friendship with the nearby dwarves of Khazad-dûm, who helped Galadriel venture further east to establish contact with Lothlorien. Celebrimbor became the lord of Eregion, and formed the Gwaith y Myrdain, a brotherhood of elven craftsmen that worked alongside the dwarves. In SA 1200, after being rejected by Gil-galad and witnessing Elrond's entry to Lindon, Sauron took on the guise of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and came to Eregion. Sauron's scheme was to control the elves of Middle-earth using rings of power that would be dominated by his One Ring, which he planned to forge after the Rings of Power had been created. Sauron managed to deceive Celebrimbor, but not Galadriel, who believed him to be an impostor. Galadriel departed for Lothlorien, as Sauron helped the Gwaith y Myrdain create the Rings of Power. Yet, unbeknownst to Sauron, Celebrimbor forged the three rings in secrecy in SA 1590. In SA 1600, Sauron took up his One Ring, but Celebrimbor understood his intentions immediately, ruining centuries of Sauron's planning. Celebrimbor went to Lothlorien, seeking counsel from Galadriel, who advised him to hide the three rings. In SA 1693, Celebrimbor gave Galadriel the Ring of Nenya, and sent the rings of Naya and Vilya to Gil-galad. Having lost the element of surprise, Sauron resolved to destroy his enemies through force, preemptively attacking them before they could unify. This initiated the War of Elves and Sauron. During this war, Eregion's military capabilities would have been nearly identical to Lindon's, though more skewed towards Noldorin-style warfare. Eregion lay directly in the path of Sauron's forces. Her survival depended on whether or not Lindon would honour its military alliance with her, for Númenor was far away and Khazad-dûm could not be fully depended upon. Because of Celebrimbor's discovery, Eregion profited from early warning, but her military was too small to hold back Sauron. In SA 1695, Gil-galad dispatched an army led by Elrond to aid Eregion, and sent word to Númenor requesting aid. By now, Sauron had gathered a great host, albeit not one as large as he would have liked, due to the two wizards Romistamo and Merennitar stirring up rebellions amongst the tribes of men in the east. Celeborn led a sortie, defeating Sauron's vanguard. However, Celeborn's forces were met with a fierce counterattack and pushed to Ostinethil, where Elrond joined them. In SA 1697, Ostinethil fell as Celebrimbor led a desperate defence on the steps of the House of the Mirdain. Elrond and Celeborn's forces were pushed out of Eregion, as Sauron captured Celebrimbor and sacked the House of the Mirdain, seizing the Nine Rings. Sauron tortured, interrogated and executed Celebrimbor, hanging his body on a pole and having it shot through with orc arrows. Sauron then turned his forces upon Elrond's army, but Durin III's army sortied out of Khazad-dûm, attacking Sauron from the rear, aided by a force of Galadrim led by Amroth. Elrond was saved, fleeing northwards to establish the realm of Imladris. Sauron drove the dwarves and Galadrim back into Khazad-dûm before laying waste to Eregion. Sauron then sought the Three Rings and turned towards Lindon, marching west, leaving a strong detachment to besiege Imladris, protecting his rear. In SA 1700, Sauron's forces pushed Gil-galad's army to the rivers Lune and Mithlond. Sauron then summoned additional forces from the southeast to attack the Grey Havens. This offensive was interrupted, however, when Kiatar landed in the north, and with Gil-galad routed Sauron at the River Lune. Sauron retreated to Sarn Ford, where he suffered another defeat and was driven out of Eriador, heading southeast. Sauron met up with reinforcements at Tharbad, but Kiatar amphibiously assaulted Long Dare in a strike which saw Sauron attacked from front and rear, suffering a defeat at the mouth of the Gwathlo. Sauron's routed army was assailed all the way to Dagorlad, whence they were finally broken. Thereafter, Sauron fled back to Mordor in humiliation. Seizing on the initiative, Gil-galad then rushed to Imladris, and together with Elrond, annihilated the besiegers. A White Council was held, and it was determined Imladris would replace Eregion as an eastern stronghold. Gil-galad appointed Elrond vice-regent over Eriador, and gave him Vilya to build up Imladris into a stronghold that would survive many ages. Meanwhile, the Númenóreans began establishing permanent settlements on the western coast, keeping Sauron in check. During the Eldar days, the Nandor and Avari had hid themselves in woodlands east of the Misty Mountains, where they became known as the Wood Elves of the Woodland Realm and Tree Elves or Galadrim of Lothlorien. Collectively, these two peoples became known as the Silvan Elves. The Elves of Lothlorien lived in Tellines, led by Amdir and later his son Amroth. Galadriel and Celeborn visited Lothlorien multiple times and settled there in the Third Age. Galadriel had a profound influence over Lothlorien, warning the kingdom of an impending threat and prompting them to mobilize an army in SA 1697 to aid Eregion. The Silvan Elves were less armed than the Elves of the West, depending on the bow, and given Nandor ancestry, perhaps the axe. They fought similarly to the Laqendi of the First Age, relying on ambush tactics and avoiding battle on the open field. They excelled in guerrilla-style warfare, concealing themselves from the world. Unlike their relatives in Mirkwood, they benefited from Galadriel's wisdom and her ring Nenya, which empowered Lothlorien. In SA 750, Oropher and his son Thranduil, two survivors of Doriath, departed Lindon with other Sindar. They headed east to Mirkwood, where they came across the Wood Elves. Oropher and his followers sought to return back to the simple existence among the Silvan Elves, who welcomed him with open arms, making him their king. Like their kinsmen in Lothlorien, the Silvan Elves were hardy and valiant, but lightly armed and armoured compared to the Eldar of the West. The Silvan Elves heeded the supreme command of Gil-galad. While Lothlorien lived a sedentary lifestyle, the Elves of Mirkwood were more nomadic, constantly migrating northwards as the shadow encroached into their woodlands. Oropher's initial capital was Amon Lak, but by the end of the Second Age, his people inhabited Emenduir. The Elves of Mirkwood relied primarily on the bow, but they were inferior to Lothlorien's larger, stouter bows, which were made of elf hair. They were also known to wield spears and swords in the Third Age. Mirkwood's population was larger than Lothlorien's, and thus their army was larger. However, their king, Oropher, was an isolationist. Oropher distanced himself from the encroachments of the dwarves of Khazad-dûm and resented the intrusions of Celeborn and Galadriel in Lothlorien. Despite this, Oropher kept contact with the other elven realms. Disturbed by Sauron's rising power, Orifer had the wisdom to foresee peace could not return until Sauron was defeated. Therefore, he gathered a large army and joined Amdir. However, despite joining in on the alliance, he made it clear he would not take orders from Gil-galad. In SA 3319, Sauron managed to destroy Numenor, but at the cost of his physical body, so then he bid his time in Barad-dûr building up an army. Elendil led the faithful survivors of Numenor to establish the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor. In SA 3429, Sauron attacked Minas Ithil, taking Isildur's forces by surprise. Minas Ithil fell, and the White Tree of Gondor was burned. Isildur sailed down the Anduin to Arnor, while Anarion defended Osgiliath and Minas Anor. In SA 3430, the last alliance of men and elves was formed between Elendil and Gil-galad at Amon Sul. They travelled to Imladris, joining Elrond, where for 3 years they forged arms and planned. They crossed the Misty Mountains and headed down the Anduin, joining forces with King Orifer, King Amdir and Durin IV. Sauron had prepared his forces to attack the alliance upon their march. He had gathered a colossal host of orcs, men of the east and south, evil creatures and dwarves, though none of Durin's folk. In SA 3434, both Orifer and Amdir both disregarded signals from Gil-galad and rashly charged upon the host of Sauron on the open plain of Dagorlad. Though valiant, they were lightly armed and quickly became separated from the rest of the army. Both forces were cut off, and Amdir was killed alongside half his army, which was driven into the dead marshes. Orifer fared no better, with 2/3 of his army slain in front of the Black Gate. Thus Thranduil and Amroth took the reins of their father's kingdoms. For months the battle raged, but Sauron's forces could not bear Gil-galad's Aeglos nor Elendil's Narsil. The alliance got past the Black Gate, marched through Cirith Gorgor and erected a siege of Barad-dûr that would last 7 years. Isildur dispatched his sons Cirion and Aratan to Minas Ithil to guard against a breakout, while his eldest son Elendor served by his side. From Barad-dûr, Sauron tossed darts, bolts and sorties, causing tremendous casualties. In Gorgoroth, Anarion was hit by a stone that crushed his helm and killed him. The siege became so dire that Sauron came out and fought Gil-galad, who was joined by Elendil. Sauron struck down Elendil, breaking Narsil in 2 and scorched Gil-galad to death with his hand. Then suddenly, Isildur took the broken Narsil and cut the ring from Sauron's hand, ending the war. Most of the Silvan Elves had perished during the war against Sauron, and had lost 2 of their kings as well. Throughout the conflict, they lacked military discipline and were out of their element on the open battlefield. Moreover, they were lightly armed and refused to take orders from those with more battle experience. Rashly charging into the enemy while disregarding military signals proved disastrous for the Silvan Elves. The cooperation of Gil-galad's elves and Elendil's Númenóreans was the decisive factor in winning the battles until they besieged Barad-dûr. It would seem likely the ability to adhere to proper battle formations was the key to winning the battles on the open plains. Therefore, it would not be a coincidence that the Elves and Númenóreans share similar battle formations, like the Gondolindrim Phalanx and Thranduil. Yet above all else, it was showing unity in the face of evil that allowed the last alliance to usher in peace, if only for a while. More videos on the world of Middle-earth are on the way. To ensure you don't miss them, subscribe and press the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.